Hello and welcome to section 5, testing Vue components. In this section we're going to be introduced to Jest and we're going to write our first spec. Then we're going to test Vuex store. We'll be introduced to the Vue test utils. We're going to test nested components and eventually we'll look at snapshot testing. In this video I'll be introducing you to Jest and we'll learn to write our first spec. First of all, we'll see what is Jest. Also, how to structure a spec or a test. Eventually we'll see how to run Jest in a watch mode. What makes the development of tests way easier and smarter. Alright, so if you recall, when we set up our new project we chose Jest as our test util. So what is Jest? Jest is an open source project by Facebook and it's JavaScript testing environment, I would say. It's more than just a test runner, it gives you everything you need. If you're familiar with testing, there are other tools in the JavaScript world like Mocha, Chai, or Karma, but all of them are like individual tools. Karma is a test runner, Mocha is an assertion library. In this case, Jest brings all of this to the table. It tries to use other tools internally under the hood, but it comes for you pre-packed with everything. So if you go through the documentation, you'll see like how to set it up and eventually. And in the documentation, you see a lot of different parts. How to use matchers, for example, or things to kind of mock things if you want to go more sophisticated testing already. And another good starting point is definitely the API on the Jest documentation. It's when you want to assert anything, that's the right way to do. You have methods to hook into. It's a lot to take in. So I'd say let's go to our project and get started there. Okay, if we check out our project, we see there's already a tests folder and it has a file for us prepared there already. It's called helloworld.spec.js. Vue CLI generated this for us to have something there. If you've never seen a spec file, it maybe looks a little confusing up front. So we'll just make it easy for us. Let's just remove it for now and create our own specs. The important thing is how to run a spec. In this case, in our package.json, you'll see there's a script for us prepared. It's called test, and it runs all the test setup for us. If we don't recall, as we set up Jest, the Vue CLI service will start Jest for us. So there are two ways for us to do it. If you want to run test in the console, you can say yarn test, or just say npm run test to kind of execute a script, and we'll try to run anything. In this case, it's failing for us because it's haven't found any files to test for. But we see that Jest exited because it doesn't find anything. So the other thing is we could also say, let's just say yarn Jest, and it would do the same thing and run automatically without some of the configuration files that Vue CLI service injects for us. But under the hood, this is the command that's run. So let's give it a file to spec. Alright. So in the test folder, unit, let's create a new file here. Let's call it test spec.js. So there are two important things here. Jest will pick up all the files in your project anyway, and it will try to look for every file that's called .spec.js or .test.js. So here, choose whatever you like better. I'm kind of used to the term spec. And maybe test spec.js is a weird name for now, but we will run with it for this course. Okay, so let's start by adding a simple function. We have an add function that takes two values, a and b, and returns a sum. So what's the easiest way of testing it? Basically, what we want to do is we see if it's gonna call add and give it like a value of 1 and 2. We expect it to return something like 3. So you can say expect add 1 and 2 to be 3. That's how easy it is to say, okay, I expect this to happen. That's very clear. But to have just let it pick it up correctly for us, we need to wrap everything in a test function. So first of all, we would describe what we want to test. Let's say add. And then we pass in the function that should be executed. And that's where this one should live. So this is our first spec. It will test for the add function, and it will run this function, and always expect something in there. Otherwise, Jest will throw an error and say, oh, there's no expectation of this function. but you should have one expectation there. In this case, that looks like a clean one. Let's give it a try. Go over here and let's say yarn test, and it should pick up the test file for us. There it is. And we have our first passing test. That's perfect. So maybe you want to kind of structure your tests in a different way. There's another thing that will come in very handy is a describe block. A describe block allows you to group a number of tests. So we can say like everything the number function. We want to have like all of them in there, and all we would need to do is move test in there. So there is a synonym for test. If you want to be more descriptive in this kind of block, you could call it, and it would say it's like it is describing what should happen here. Let's see what the output of the console would be for us. So we see before it was on the add function, and now we have like this group on top where it says number functions add, and then it's like grouped and gives us a little bit more flexibility, especially if we write a lot of specs. This is also the right point if you want to do something like hook into the function or do anything before, like could say before. And this would be a function that is run before any of the specs. Or we could also say before each, and this would run before any single one. So that's the handy place to kind of describe blocks allow you for this kind of structure. If you want to write, let's say, more specs at one point, and in this case, let's create a new one. And I don't want to go to the terminal all the time and rerun yarn tests as it happened. But luckily, there's a watch mode provided for us by Jest. You can say yarn test and add a watch flag to it. So let's see what happens. So it pops up, it runs our specs. And then it gives us a bunch of usage options. In this case, we could say A for run all tests, or we could just let it run for the new failed ones, for example. In this case, it's fine for me to have run all the tests all the time, but it should just keep watch. So let's see what happens. Let's say if we add a new test here and say add parses strings to a number, for example. So let's write our spec and do test-driven development. So we expect if we call add with 1 and 2 to be 3. Let's see. So we kind of see our first failed test here. It says, okay, it expected to be 3, but we received 12. Of course, JavaScript, if some element is a string, it will parse the other element to a string automatically. So we have 12 as the result. That's not what we want to do. So let's fix this test for now. So let's call number. And also pass this one as a number as well. If you don't like the number operator, it's not the right one for you in this case, you could also say parse int, and this will also turn a string to a number. I tend to use number whenever it makes sense, because it's a little bit more readable. And by saving it, we already see that our spec reran automatically, and we now have a green spec.